Welcome to our Sweetie session, a tale of two counties.
Today, we're going to hear about the ACWIC model and coaching and implementation in Nevada and Michigan.
I want to welcome the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. Today, we have the director, Lynette Wright, and her partner, Kamisha Brady, the training supervisor. Today, we're here to talk about coaching. So Kamisha, Lynette, can you tell me a little bit about the what and why Wayne County chose ACWIC?
Well, one of the reasons why we chose the coaching model, well, first, it started off as a journey. Let me say that. We recognized that we had an issue with retention with our staff. We also recognized that there was some issues with morale and a disconnect between managers and the workforce. So we wanted to remedy that. We understood that as an agency and as a county, we need to make a change. So we reached out to Centers for States and we started to explore different types of models. And the coaching model seemed to be what we needed. It encouraged our managers to encourage their staff to grow and to develop their strengths and play on those strengths and also be a part of the decision-making that happens in the county. And hopefully giving people a sense of purpose. Everything should not come down from the top. And we understood that. And we made a commitment as a management team to start this process with management because we recognized that we really needed to make a change because how we were managing was no longer working in the county. And we wanted to be a part of a big change. So that's pretty much the reason why we chose to do this model. And we've been happy trying to implement it and we're going to keep going.
Kamisha, is there anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback off of what Lynette said, one of the things we recognize is that coaching is necessary for sustainability across the workforce. And moving away from the traditional approach of starting from the bottom, we did start at the top. And appreciate the fact that our leadership team recognized that it was necessary to start from the top down to model that behavior for us. And it makes a big difference because it moves us from the matriarchal approach. And they model what coaching should look like. And in turn, it just benefits us all and helps to sustain the staff and promotes just their learning, critical thinking, decision-making, those things that are sustainable and necessary to provide service to the families.
Kamisha and Lynette, you both talked about sustainability, transition in practice, what we asked our staff to differently. So talk to me a little bit. What does coaching actually ask your staff to do differently?
I think if you start from a leadership point of view, I grew up in a very different time in the agency. I've been here for a very long time. So I grew up under leadership where you were told what to do and you did that. And now we're in a different point in social work and we want to develop staff. We want them to be free thinkers and we want to come together as a team with as many thoughts as possible. So the important thing about this and the exciting thing is that we include everybody in the decision-making process when we can. That's still not always a possibility, but when we're able to do that, we believe in a team approach. We want to get people's opinions. We want people to learn how to depend on their own way of thinking and be comfortable with suggesting ideas to leadership without the fear of being shut down or ignored. So we really want everybody to be a part of the growth of the county as well as the decision making, because that is what builds leaders and that's what keeps people working for you. In addition, we want to be able, if we aren't modeling appropriate, respectful behavior, how are we then going to service clients? So it's a trickle down effect. We're doing it for not just staffing, we're doing it for the folks we serve.
And Kamisha, yeah, what are your thoughts?
The coaching approach asks us to communicate differently. So moving away from the supervision format where you come and ask me what to do, we have a dialogue and we discuss things to do together. That lends to new skills and the critical thinking. You'll probably hear me say that often, but it lends to a different approach in terms of how we learn, how we deliver, and just how we do the work overall. So I've gotten feedback personally from supervisors, because we selected the ACWIC model, that the staff that have been under my supervision for that training timeframe are more robust in their learning and service delivery when they move or transition to their permanent units. And that's because of coaching.
Thank you. So Lynette, you touched on briefly about challenges in the workforce, specifically related to morale. And we understand that there's never a good time to implement, but how and why have you maintained progress in a time of crisis?
Well, the why is we don't really have a choice. If you talked about retention and you can't keep folks, you got to make a change. Otherwise, we won't be able to function. You know, it's going to be we're in a crisis right now. However, we do have the hope that we will move above the crisis. We want the folks that are with us, because they are so bogged down with so many different priorities. We want them to feel supported by management. So perhaps they would stay. You know, what data tells us is that people are connected to people. So if we as managers show ourselves to be good people and willing to help and support our staff, you know, that's the connection to keep people there, because it's certainly not the workload, because the workload is extremely heavy. So we know that we have to use a different way of keeping people connected. So that is the why. And what was the other part of your question, Tamara?
The other question was, why have you maintained progress in a time of crisis?
Well, I think why is here again, we just don't have a choice. You know, we have to do something different. There's never going to be a good time. So we opted not to stop this process, because it's always going to be conflicting priorities, some kind of issues with a big system like this. So we decided that we would continue to implement this, and we want this to be a part of our culture, because once you get past the implementation period, we expect that this is going to be how we function. So this is just a necessary thing right now, and we expect to move past it.
Great, thank you. Kamisha, do you have anything you would like to add to that?
Yep, so truthfully, the occurrences of crisis will never change. It's the nature of our work. So it only makes sense to make change now. And it's challenging for us to ask staff to do things differently, which is why leadership is taking the approach, or it's the trickle down effect. So they're starting. So our leadership making this change just definitely will yield progress and change, because they're starting. But modeling coaching builds confidence and those sustainable skills that we talked about. And if we have confident workers, we know that we're going to have confident families, because that's going to transition into the community when we're working. And that's necessary.
Great. Right now, let's talk about impact. Kamisha, you mentioned that you've been receiving great feedback on how staff were more robust in their service delivery and their learning. And could you tell us more how coaching impacted your work and share some success stories?
Using the coaching approach it makes both myself and the specialist responsible for their work. So again, if we think about how we've supervised in the past, that model is just kind of antiquated. It doesn't work. It doesn't promote sustainability, and it doesn't increase the skill set. So you have people coming to you asking for answers. How do I do this? What should I do? My favorite question is, that's a great question. What should you do? Because that is going to promote your thinking. So now staff know on the training unit, because it's our foundation in the county, that critical thinking is required, decision-making is required. So as opposed to coming with those questions, they know that they have to come prepared. So they're coming with their scenario, with the possible solution, and they're looking for feedback. That increases their confidence. Just today, someone came to me, a supervisor, and said, your training specialists were in my support lab that you invited me to yesterday, and it was a phenomenal group. Can I pick somebody from this group to come to my unit? That hasn't always been the testimony. But again, it's the coaching implementation.
Thank you. It's really great to hear. Awesome.
Lynette, do you have anything that you would add about what you've seen as the director for the county and feedback from staff and impact?
I've seen, it was really interesting. I was in a meeting a few weeks ago with some sections, and a couple of the sections referred to the coaching model and how they're trying to change their approach. And one of the sections particularly, she's pretty high strung, and she was like, well, I'm trying to think about the principles of coaching, so I had to change how I said that, but I was glad to hear that. And even for me, how I approach things differently. For example, Kamisha and I had a conversation when she went through a child death, and I reached out to her. How are you doing? How do you feel about how we handled it? She gave me some feedback. Some was good, some was some things that we as management could definitely improve on. So I took that back, but I think it's important to take the time to reach out, to people who are going through some challenges, because regardless, if you have a child death, that impacts us all. And being a supervisor on a case like that is that's major. So as a management team, I think people need to see that we reach out and we're available, and we can provide some secondary trauma care for them as well. I don't know, Kamisha, did you have any comments about that particular situation?
I'll say that I was grateful for the outreach effort. And one of my questions was, after she asked me how I was, I asked, do I have permission to be honest? And she was welcome. She welcomed my honesty. And I'll be honest, I know who I am. I can be pretty assertive. I'm not really fearful. But I asked permission, right? But that's not everybody's strong suit. Because we have been in a matriarchal culture, work culture in the past, some people would say, I would never dare, express how I truly feel, because they don't know if there's going to be any backlash or, not respective to our current leadership or anybody to be identified, but that culture just breeds not the best for our morale. But being asked by your county leadership or checked upon, how are you? That's awesome. And I appreciated that. And I appreciated the fact that she took my feedback and she did model coaching during that call. Now, I wasn't expecting it, so I'm glad I was camera ready, but it was a great conversation, and she made some acknowledgements, good and bad. So it was awesome.
Lynette and Kamisha, I really want to thank you for your time today. Implementing coaching within Wayne County and Michigan is an incredible approach to supporting your workforce. And I just want to thank you for your leadership and your consistency in this effort.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Today we have Lisa Martinez, Deputy Director, and Lisa Shaw, Training Manager for Clark County Department of Family Services, together with Matt Geiger, Title IV-E Training Coordinator, and Karen Tyler, Child Welfare Workforce Development Specialist from the Nevada Partnership for Training. So Nevada, why did you choose coaching? What does coaching mean to you personally?
So I'll go ahead and start us off, and thanks, Tamara. It's because it's really, what problem were we trying to solve by choosing coaching and going down the path of actually developing training? In essence, we were having some struggles moving away from a compliance-based practice. And a couple of years before, we had moved to a safety model that was really rich in family engagement and empowerment. And we were seeing struggles. We were doing a lot of training at the workforce level, and is actually the purveyor of the model that we ended up choosing, did literally years of training, along with my team, which did some motivational interviewing training. Actually, motivational interviewing is actually part of our safety model and is expected to be used with families in the engagement and the practice that they partake in. So it was a struggle to move from being kind of prescriptive and compliance based in the interactions with families to something that was more engagement focused and really trying to get at the core reasons for the maltreatment. So we ended up choosing coaching, and this is really exciting to me because as someone who oversees a training entity, the more support you give people after a training, the more it's going to stick, because you have to start applying kind of the things that you're learning into your practice. And so if you're able to talk to somebody about that, the struggles, and have somebody facilitate a conversation around what needs to happen next, rather than being told what you need to do, that is really, you're going to have more traction on the behavior change that you're wanting to see from the training, along with really growth in the person's practice moving towards what you're wanting to do. So I was very excited that we wanted to go down the path to be able to give leadership, and really specifically here, supervisors, the skill set of coaching to be able to facilitate conversations around our safety model, which to a lot of people can be complex. And there's a lot of things that you need to do to be able to arrive at the decisions that you need to make, per family. So that was exciting to me, because the more we could do outside of the training room to get at applying what's being learned and so forth, and really building the critical thinking that needs to happen in the field. Now, pardon me. And to me, really, there's a couple things that come out of this, because we were moving from being a compliance and prescriptive practice with families, and one could argue we still had that kind of interaction going on between workers and supervisors. So using a coaching approach really took us to modeling what was being expected from the caseworkers and their families, to being incorporated into those natural conversations in supervision, in the water cooler conversations around cases and so forth. And so it just made sense to move to kind of embracing really this empowerment type of mentality with families and with staff. Now, the other thing that I'm super excited about is coaching gives you kind of like a macro intervention to kind of those workforce struggles that we all have, and to try to move the needle. We all have these retention issues. We have worker satisfaction issues with their job and so forth. Coaching touches those things in somewhat of an indirect way. Coaching improves the supervisor-worker relationship. We know from workforce data, not just in child welfare, but that is the #1 reason people will leave and having issues around retention, is having a good relationship with somebody's boss. We know that improvement in those types of issues can lead to a better organizational climate and culture, moving to more of a learning style or learning organization. And I think people being empowered and able to critically think and provide through a facilitated discussion with their supervisor, getting to solve their own problems, I think that's more, that leads to greater job satisfaction. You feel empowered. I think it leads to autonomy. So that was the why, and the what is obviously the coaching. And from there, we wanted to move in that direction. Our state, Nevada, sought technical assistance from the Capacity Center to be able to come to us with different coaching models, let our jurisdictions and our stakeholders look at the different models that were out there. And we ended up choosing the ACWIC model. Now, the ACWIC model is what our training is based on, but we came up with our own way of training that was very supportive post-training, just like we wanted. We literally coach people after coaching about how to apply a coaching mindset with their staff and so forth. So, and the other thing that was unique is that we had done, the Nevada Partnership for Training had done a lot of training with caseworkers. And this was really an intervention designed at leadership. And so we actually targeted agency leaders first, and then managers, and then supervisors. We wanted to have this kind of cascading approach of the intervention kind of matriculating all through kind of the pyramid of the organizational structure. Now, the great thing is, and I'm going to ask for Lisa Martinez to be able to provide some context to it, is that in Clark County, coaching was not something new. It was something that we had experimented with and we actually had some success. So Lisa, do you mind giving some background on that?
Thanks, Matt, for starting us off with some of that history. That really leads me into talking about our partnership with the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and Clark County Department of Family Services. Through our partnership with UNLV, they began using coaching in our new worker training academy to support the transfer of learning for new employees. This really has been a great partnership with UNLV. I can't stress that enough. I'm not sure where we would be without this partnership, to be honest. However, we did receive a lot of feedback that once our staff left the New Worker Academy, they experienced, I would say, an abrupt shift in how their new agency supervisors supported that learning that they had received from the New Worker Academy. So much so, I hate to say that we saw a high turnover in staff leaving our agency really within the first year after leaving the academy. As leadership, we came to the realization that we really needed to provide coaching training to our supervisors and managers in the agency to create really more of a consistency as workers left the New Worker Academy and went on to the field. Also, to support just, I would say, the overall morale of the Department of Family Services staff and using this coaching approach rather than a punitive approach. So we rolled out coaching, as Matt you had mentioned. It was this cascade effect. It was our executive leadership, our managers, our supervisor, and really with that, we have really started to see the shift, really past starting, that our agency supervisors and leadership have really embraced and supported the coaching model, which really in return is just supports all of our agency staff. It really has been a nice, pleasant shift in our morale, our retention of staff, just how we just do day-to-day business. It's just the natural progression of the learning from the new hire academy or new worker academy and into the field.
Great. I really appreciate that background. You did mention moving from compliant-based to engagement-focused practice. What does coaching ask staff or the organization to do differently?
So Tamar, let me start by saying, and Matt had mentioned it, motivational interviewing is really inherent in our safety model here in Nevada. It partners and empowers families. Coaching is the equivalent to be less directive to staff and really to, as I mentioned, empower them. By no way, shape, or form does it direct families or staff. We started the initial motivational interviewing training, I believe it was 2008. And by the time we came to 2012, it was a mandatory training requirement for all of our agency staff. Coaching really honors our staff as the experts to determine how they want to improve and grow, continue to grow their professional skill and development. It also takes all the burden off our agency supervisors and managers to have all the answers all of the time. Allows them to be less directive and begins to create a focus on helping staff to develop mastery and autonomy in their own work, really honing those tools and skills that they have learned and practiced and developed through the coaching model. Fortunately, our partnership with UNLV has really shifted our staff's mindsets. Karen, would you mind chiming in that? I think you have a great perspective on the shift.
Sure. Just in listening to you guys, I was just reflecting on some of the parallel processes of the expectations in the field with workers, with their families. We don't want our workers to be directive with our families. We want our families to take ownership in their own lives because they're the experts. and thinking about it from the perspective of an agency as leaders, because we have a lot of great leaders, in the field. And in terms of that mindset, we're looking for a change in culture, right? Coaching is not another thing to do. Staff is doing it already, asking those powerful questions, reflecting. But what's required is really what Lisa, you just mentioned, a change in the mindset. How do we move from being non-compliant? Matt mentioned earlier about non-compliance. With leaders, an approach from 4 different spheres: administrative, clinical, supportive, and developmental. And with that, staff, for them to understand the administrative piece, right? Not how many visits did you do this month? Let's talk about the visit. What did you learn when you were at the home visit? What are your next steps? So having conversations with staff, understanding, right? Because we're all federally funded and we have to meet those administrative goals. But even in that, having staff to walk them through, asking them questions. Why is it that your case notes need to be in on time? Right, having them to critically think through the process of how it connects with funding, and then how funding provides us the opportunity to continue to keep children and families safe. Also, with that mindset from a clinical perspective, I've been in the field for quite some time, and there's a lot of walking in the office and telling me, tell me what to do. This is my problem. I need an answer. Help me to fix this. And then staff then becomes dependent on their supervisor or their leader. But with that mindset shift, just really helping staff to understand, you got this. You have the skills, you have the knowledge, you have the abilities to make the decisions that you need to make, and empowering them in such a way where before they come into the office and ask a supervisor, hey, tell me what to do, that they're sitting at their desk and they're walking through, thinking in a methodical way of how do I continue to keep kids safe. So with that mindset shift, it's really important for leaders to grow and develop their staff. The other 2 pieces is that supportive and developmental piece. And Matt or Lisa, one of them mentioned about the engagement and relationships. That's very, very important in our field. And with coaching gives in child welfare, we recognize that there's a hierarchy and we need the hierarchy, but coaching puts us all on the same playing field, if you will, right? Despite our titles, we're all here for the same purpose of keeping kids safe. And with that, that's that engagement, relationships. How do leaders come alongside and support our staff? What are the needs? Oftentimes we know in the field that we're understaffed, but to be able to pause sometimes and have some conversations, I might say, hey, Lisa, what do you need right now? What type of support is it that's required for you to continue to keep kids safe? And then that developmental piece, as we as leaders shift our mindset, as we have one-to-ones, yes, we've got to check boxes and walk down the expectations, because that's a part of the process. Making sure we follow policy, absolutely. But in our one-to-ones, to really hone in on the staff as a person. What is it that they need? Where do you want to grow? Where do you want to expand? What are your challenges? And have them to do their self-assessments about where I'm skilled at, where I'm struggling at, and what are my next steps. We mentioned retention. One of the reasons for coaching is retention, and with retention, having conversations about where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? Where do you see yourself in the next 6 months? Sometimes we have to use a shorter time frame. But with that, us as leaders, really looking at things from a different perspective and shifting our mindset, not to do anything different because we're doing it already, but making sure that we're operating as leaders from an administrative perspective, from a clinical perspective, a supportive and a developmental perspective as we continue to grow our staff and engage them in relationships as well. I know, Lisa, we've had some conversations about, mindsets and culture shifts, things of that nature. What are your thoughts?
Thanks, Karen. When you were speaking, what I heard loud and clear is the mind shift. And so when I'm asked the question, what is coaching ask staff to do differently? I don't think that it asks staff to do anything differently. I really do think it's a mind shift. And we talked about how, a couple of times we talked about how motivational interviewing is really embedded in the work that we do with our safety model. And to me, coaching is just an extension of those MI skills that we use with families, but we bring it into supervisory engagement and staff skill development. What I think coaching does is it really empowers staff to critically think through the issues they're facing. You mentioned not being told what to do, right? But allowing them the time to think through what that decision could be. And that in turn helps them develop their skills. It helps them create confidence within themselves and really some creativity to think outside the box, maybe in situations that maybe they didn't think before they can do. This is the opportunity to think a little differently. And so when we use coaching skills with our staff, to me, it creates a positive and supportive environment where employees really feel respected, they feel valued and motivated. And I firsthand have been able to see that beauty in the New Hire Academy that Lisa Martinez mentioned, seeing staff being coached and receiving that coaching and being able to move on and continue with the coaching that they receive in the field. It's really been an awesome experience to see in us develop. And so when asked the question, what do we think it does differently? I would just say mind shift. It's really just about a mind shift.
You all mentioned through these first two questions, issues like retention and concerns in workforce. And so there's never really a great time to implement anything. There's always stressors. So sort of like, how are you able to keep this going in light of those challenges, and why?
So for us, for anybody who works in child welfare, right, there's always going to be demands for time, competing demands, right, for time, attention, and effort. It's the nature of the work that we do. We all know that when we signed up to work in this field. And because of that, prioritizing coaching as a mindset and philosophy, to me, not only helps the individual employee, but also impacts the organizational culture as a whole. Nevada, we were committed to implementing coaching prior to the pandemic. And we were in the process of training our staff when the pandemic hit. And so when I look back at that, I think, wow, that could have been really easy for us as an agency to just say, pause, stop, not right now, right? But we didn't do that. We believe in this approach, and we knew more than ever that our staff would benefit from the additional support. So we continued with the implementation of Coach NV. And I know, Karen, you were an integral part of that during the time when the pandemic hit, and being able to still provide the training for our staff and the individual coaching. And so what are your thoughts on never being a good time, but we did it anyway?
Lisa, just as you were speaking, thinking back to the pandemic, right? I remember the day where everyone was told to go home, right? The world stopped. And we were in the middle of an academy, as a matter of fact. And we had to pause and figure out how we go online. And even with individual coaching and our Coach NV course, those things were paused momentarily because we really needed to put into some measures of how we support staff in the field, right? Because we all know that we're first responders. And with first responders, although the world stopped, we still have to go knock on the doors and keep our kids safe. And after we were able to resume the academy, and after we were able to resume individual coaching, some of the coaching sessions that I had with some of the leaders was really around how you support your staff in the environment that we're in. And it was a perfect time to continue with coaching, because our staff knows their needs the best, right? They're the ones at home with the kids. with the teacher saying, hey, you have 3 children that need to be on the camera, things of that nature, and then the demands of the job. And it was really important as I supported staff in coaching and walking them through how they support their staff, um, helping their staff while they're in the field really critically think at that point in time, because we really were physically disconnected. And with that, there was a need for staff to have even more autonomy and to think even more critically. Leaders were right there supporting the staff, I know that. But if they're on the phone with someone addressing a concern or issue or supporting them through being in the home, making a decision, and someone else's, another staff is waiting to have a conversation, in the meantime, that staff has got to make some decisions. And that coaching approach really supports leaders and walking their staff through how to critically think, how to make decisions, and that autonomy. And even as we talked about earlier, that supportive piece, that was even more the reason for staff to join together and leaders to work in partnership, to have some flexibility and recognize what flexibility we have, because you do have children at home and other responsibilities and things of that nature. So how can you still make sure that your job is done, that your family needs are met, and we keep children safe? And really supporting staff through, asking those questions to help them come up with their conclusions. And then, as we all know, here in Clark County, we have a new administrative staff, and there's been a lot of turnover and things of that nature. And sitting down, having conversations about how it's impacting staff. There's never a good time, right? We're short staffed. We've got another academy that's coming up, and we're filling in the holes. But in the meantime, let's talk about how I can support you right where you are. Because it's easy, as Lisa mentioned, to say, hey, we're going to put coaching to the side because we have these other administrative things that we need to do. But remember, coaching approach really supports those 4 spheres. And with that, it's even more the reason now for leaders to continue coaching their staff so they can figure out how do we make this transition. Even with CWVE as a whole, right? It's a mindset shift. We've been telling people what to do for 30, 40, 50 years. And with that, how do we change our mindset? Those are real conversations that we really need to have. So although, as Lisa mentioned, it's never a good time, we've got to continue just moving forward step by step and supporting staff as they continue to keep kids safe.
I heard you guys talk about deepening that toolbox for supervisors and managers to support their staff. So let's talk about it. Like, what has the impact of coaching been for you on your workforce?
Well, Jeremy, that's a good question. We're actually in our fidelity phase of our coaching implementation program. And with that, with Fidelity, we gather data from our individual coaching sessions. They complete satisfaction surveys. And as a stage, periodically, we continue to provide assessments. And some of the data that we found that staff is reporting that as a result of participating in coaching, that they have a better increased understanding of what it is that they're doing, why they're doing what they're doing. Their confidence is being built because there's less of, hey, I've got to go ask my supervisor, or I'm looking for an answer. But they know that they have everything within them. So there's been an increase in confidence. And although sometimes, with something new, it's hard, but they've also been able to there's been an increase in the use of our coaching approach and our coaching model. So staff it's starting to take traction from an implementation process. Matt and I, we're always chatting and putting our brains together. It really takes about 5 years for a coaching model or any implementation to take root. And with that, we started in 2019, and here we are in 2023. And the data is showing, right, that we're moving that needle. We're making progress as we work in partnership with one another. Lisa and I meet often and having conversations, right? Who needs to go to coaching? Who needs to go to the training? That's that administrative piece. But and individual coaching. I've been hearing great things as I continue to train other trainings as well, because I train the leaders. There's conversations about coaching and how they're still excited and the challenges. We really have we have some real conversations about the challenges. And I just ask them those questions, coaching them through how do you work your way through the challenges. And Lisa and I put our brains together, and Lisa has heard and saw some of the improvements as well.
Thanks for that, Karen. I guess in my mind, one of the biggest positive impacts for our agency at Clark County Family Services, we've really seen how implementing coaching for our staff they've really embraced the model. As you mentioned, and Lisa Shaw mentioned, it would have been easy for us to just move on, pandemic hit, focus elsewhere. But, we were committed to, going forward. And I think as a result that it really has improved our agency morale and culture. Now, as we've transitioned out of the pandemic, and I'd like to say life goes back to normal. It's really a different normal, right? People's priorities have changed, and how they reflect on life, and their work life has changed. Our staff is using these coaching tools in their day-to-day work, and they want to use the tools. They find it refreshing. They embrace it. I would add that just coaching teaches our agency employees just new skills for success, and it helps them improve productivity at work. Having a manager, a supervisor, your executive leadership that's also a coach really makes them more approachable. So when we have new employees coming, out of our training academy, our new worker academy, they feel more comfortable reaching out to their supervisor, manager, agency director. And for me, that really sets the tone to develop and improve our agency morale and culture. Karen, you had mentioned our agency has had a lot of changes in our leadership due to COVID, retirement. People decide to move on to other things. And for me, the little baby steps that we have taken and the bigger steps that we have taken to improve our agency morale and culture are just huge. And I really have to contribute that to our coaching model. It hasn't been easy, I'll say that. Pandemic didn't help, obviously. So it wasn't just this miraculous life-saving thing. It took baby steps. Change is never easy. Change is never easy in child welfare. So getting staff to buy in and feel comfortable with the model, it's taken some work, right? And that's okay, because at the end result, we're seeing the fruits of our hard work. Lisa Shaw, you might have a different perspective or something to add to my thoughts.
Thanks, Lisa. I really think the greatest impact in my mind is really how coaching builds a foundational mindset of how we all work together. It develops autonomy for staff, right? It saves, we talked about saving supervisors time in one-to-one meetings, because their staff now come forward with solutions because they know their supervisor will ask them for their thoughts and the best next steps. So no longer is it, here's my issue, tell me what to do. It might be, here's my issue, but on the receiving end as a supervisor, the questions being asked are, well, what are your thoughts on that? What do you think the next best approach could be? And when you're asking those questions with staff, that's empowering. That goes back to them feeling like they're a part of this and they're on the journey with you. And it's not just being told to, but I can be a part of change. And what I think and my input really matters. And that's empowering. And I think it just develops accountability for how we all work together with one another. And that in and of itself helps morale, I think, when we're not looking at it as it's my thing to have to be responsible for, but it's our thing, right? We all are here working in child welfare because we want to ensure the safety of children. And in And when we're having questions that come up in staffings, when we're in that boat together and we're really there trying to help those clients the best that we can and those children, using that coaching approach, I think just helps all around morale and developing staff and supervisors as well.
Well, great. It sounds like you're making a huge impact in your community. And so this was great. I want to thank you all for sharing your coaching story and for all the important work that you do for children and families in Clark County. And I want to thank you all watching for your time and your attention.
That was pretty exciting. What I heard from Michigan was that coaching is an approach with their staff. It supports an inclusive environment for staff and leaders to show up authentically. A major shift for the workforce focused on creating a learning environment that focuses on building capacity, competency, and confidence for all.
And that's very similar to what I heard from the Nevada team, how shifting from a culture of monitoring and oversight to engagement and support improves morale of staff and creating a more inclusive environment, and how simply asking open-ended questions support autonomy and critical thinking of staff to take the lead into their own cases.
For more information on coaching, coaching practices, and coaching models, please visit the Capacity Building Center for State's website, where all of our materials are available for the public. Thank you for attending this session focused on coaching and supervision, and have a good day.